Is the Cinderella story still possible in March Madness today, or has the transfer portal and NIL completely ruined the magic? There's a lot of talk about this right now, which is why I looked at 15 years of March Madness data to try and help answer this question. And by the end of this video, you'll see why some people might actually be right about the March Madness Cinderella team potentially becoming extinct. But also, you'll see how the KenPom adjusted efficiency metric might tell us a more nuanced story. But first, let's set the stage. For the first time since 2008, the Final Four is all of the 1 seeds. On top of that, the combined total of the Elite 8 teams, if you were to add up all their seeds, is tied for the lowest of all time since we expanded to 64 teams way back in 1985. So it makes sense why there's a lot of talk about Cinderella teams not really being able to be a thing anymore. But is that actually true? Or are we just seeing a potential flaw in analyzing a single tournament? Because sure, March Madness has 63 games, and when you say that you analyze 63 games, that sounds like a lot. But you also got to remember that it's made up of 64 teams, so the majority of schools only play either 1 or 2 games. That means all it takes is a few buckets here or there to totally flip the entire narrative. For example, what if Texas Tech held on to this win probability against Florida to make the Final Four as long as they closed out the last 3 minutes of this game where they led by 9? Or what about this? What if Coach Cal's 10-seeded Arkansas team that most people didn't even think were tournament material at the start of the year actually held on to this win probability against that same Texas Tech team 1 game earlier? All of a sudden, Arkansas doesn't lose in the Sweet 16, but they make the Elite 8, which means that there's a 10 seed in the Elite 8, and it's a team that only had a 3% chance of making the Elite 8 before the tournament started. Are we still having the same massive Cinderella conversation then if a double-digit seed is able to make it to the Elite 8? I don't know. So rather than base our opinions just off this tournament alone, what if we looked at all of the 64 tournament teams when they entered the tournament? Now, some of our opinions wouldn't necessarily be based off of one bad performance in the first round, but it would be based off the 35 games that all 64 teams played before March Madness. And then let's do that for every March Madness team from 2008 to today. And specifically, we're going to look at KenPom's adjusted efficiency metric, which if you aren't familiar with, the bigger the number, the better the team is. So one hypothesis of whether or not the Cinderella team is done is the fact that the transfer portal is meaning that all of the elite schools are able to pile up on talent, and there's just a massive gap between the top 10 schools and everybody else, right? Like, that's why the Elite 8 was all chalk, and that's why the Final Four was all chalk. So what if we look at the top 3 seeds in the tournament, in other words, the top 12 ranked teams entering the tournament based off of the tournament seeding, and let's look at those top 3 seeds for every year that we have data on from 08 to today. Again, we're looking at KenPom's adjusted net efficiency, which is really just how good have you performed, and it accounts for basic things like offense versus defense versus pace of play versus opponent and all that stuff. And yes, if you look at this, it is pretty clear that the top 3 seeded teams on average this year is a significant step up in talent than the rest. Like, let's look at this together. So, okay, maybe the people that are doubting whether or not a Cinderella team can still succeed might actually have a point. I mean, if the top 12 schools this year are way better on average than the top 12 schools in previous years, maybe it does mean that the league is a little bit too top heavy. So what if we did this same kind of approach, but did it across all 16 seeds? What would we see then? So that's what this is. And I'm gonna pause because I know there's a lot of lines, but this is literally every single tournament team in the round of 64 from 2008 to today based off on the adjusted net rating of that seed. So each line represents the average as time goes on of every single one of the 16 seeds. So if we zoom in on the top right hand side, we can see that same little bump for the number 1, number 2, and number 3 seed line from 2024 to 2025. What I'm not sure if we see though is the same relationship for kind of the middle class of the tournament, right? Like seeds 4 through 12. Like, what's the deal here? Some of them seem to be trending down slightly, and maybe, you know, the 25th best team is losing their star player to a school like Duke. Who knows? But some of them are trending up too. I mean, like, look at that band of green in that area right there. Seems like a lot of the middle seeds, 4, 5, 6 seeds, whatever, seem to be actually getting a little bit better than they were in previous years. So if the top 3 seeds are a little bit better than before, and the middle class seeds like 4 through 12 might be a little bit better, might be a little bit worse, what's happening to the bottom? Well, the 16 seed line does seem to be decreasing, but I don't know if we can make like real strong conclusions off that. You got to remember that line is an average of 4 teams for every single year. So it's not some like big macro trend. What I'm trying to say is I don't know if this graph does much for me, right? Like it's pretty, it's kind of hard to read, but I don't know if it like jumps out and tells me that teams are all of a sudden better now than before at the top and way worse at the bottom. Like I don't know if that's happening. In fact, let's just take the average Ken Palm adjusted efficiency for all of the 16 seeds for this tournament, and then we'll take the average of what we expected that seed to be based off all past years, right? So we'll take all the 2025 1 seeds, average them out. We'll take all the 1 seeds from previous years, average them out, and let's see what kind of gap we have between this year's batch of 1 seeds and the rest. And what you're seeing now is a chart of doing that for all 16 seeds in this tournament. Now, what stands out here is the same conclusion we had on that first graph, which is the 1 seeds in this tournament are stronger than any of the 1 seeds we have seen before. In fact, with my pre-tournament data that I got off Kaggle, 4 out of the top 7 best teams entering the tournament of all time from 08 to today are this year's 4 1 seeds. Like these teams are ridiculous. But what's also interesting to me personally is look at the band of seeds from 2 to 12. Sure, the 5 seeds and the 10 seeds are a little bit worse or right around what we would expect usually, but literally everywhere else is better this year than what we usually see. The only areas that are really worse are maybe the 13 seeds, but the 16 seeds especially. So I don't know. I mean, if you were to draw a line, I guess it would kind of slope downwards as the top schools here in March Madness are better this year for their seed than, what we would expect. And then the bottom schools in our March Madness seeding, like seeds 13 through 16, are either a little worse or about what we would expect based off previous years. So yeah, maybe the line's going down, but I don't know if this is enough for me to like really be sold on this narrative that the Cinderella run is over. To me, a Cinderella team is like a 7 through 12 seed that makes a very far run, right? Like it's cool when a 16 beats a 1, it's cool when a 14 beats a 3, and maybe they make, the round of 32, or maybe they make the Sweet 16. But to me, a Cinderella like goes on a Final Four run. And while it didn't happen this year, partially because the 1 seeds were so dominant, I don't think it was impossible to happen based off the strength of some of the March Madness middle class here compared to what they usually are. I mean, just look at the 11 and 12 seeds. Like the 11 and 12 seeds are much better this year in adjusted efficiency than the normal 11 and 12 seeds. So I don't know. Really, what could be happening here is maybe we're seeing at the very tail end where the impact of NIL and the transfer portal is existing. Maybe, the top 30, top 50 schools in the nation, the people that are in like the Power 4 conferences are able to benefit from NIL and everybody else doesn't, which means if your teams rank all the D1 programs from 1 to 300 or however many there are, if you're in like the 50 to 100 bracket, maybe you're a little bit less competitive today than you were 5 years ago. If there's any sort of shift, like all of basketball wide from NIL and transfer portal, maybe it's those teams, right? Like that would make sense with the little tail of the 13 through 16 seeds. But this data alone, I don't think is enough for me to like confidently believe in that statement. At the end of the day, it's just really hard to draw conclusions from a tournament like this. I mean, there's just so many things that can happen, and it doesn't help too when we just happen to have 4 of the strongest 1 seeds of all time. And if the argument is, hey, maybe all of the resources are going to the elite 5 or 10 schools, fine, that's a fair point, but why are all of the 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 seeds better than ever as well? right alongside the 1 seeds. So there it is. Maybe this graph is enough for you to confidently claim that the Cinderella team is dead because you see that linear trend going down, or maybe it's enough for you to defend the potential for a Cinderella and say that we had really strong 11 and 12 seeds compared to the normal 11 and 12 seeds, and they just didn't get all the breaks that they probably needed to make a Final Four run. Whichever side you sit, I think the clear conclusion here for me is that we need more data. This is not enough to just look at these 63 games, and it might not even be enough to look at just the March Madness teams. It might make more sense to look at all Division I teams and see if there's some sort of larger shift, but that might be a topic for another video. Either way, thanks for watching this one. I hope this was helpful. I personally had a lot of fun, but I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Peace out. I will say, YouTube likes to put up a video of mine that they think you're gonna like, and this might be one. I don't know. Might be worth clicking. I don't know. Just a thought.